Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Rams Review podcast, where we've got a couple of interesting games to dissect. Perhaps not the most entertaining from a Dulwich perspective, but interesting games. I'm really selling this. Uh, but I am joined, Jack, with you by Chris Holt. Chris, how have you been, mate?
Oh, could have been better, Jack, after the disappointing football we've had to endure this last 7 days. But yeah, let's crack on.
Yeah, I mean, let's start with Saturday, and in fact, a weekend that Foxes ruined my weekend in multiple ways, mate. Because first we had the defeat, and then genuinely, Foxes chewed through my internet cable on Sunday morning, so that made things more complicated. But yeah, no. What were your thoughts on the game, Chris?
Well, I think it was I think it's the highest percentage of possession game we've had all season so far. But you wouldn't think that was the case after that first half, where we got absolutely, let's be honest, toward one, should we say? Look, I think preparation was poor. Clearly, there was a naivety to match up against what Leicester were going to bring. There's probably an expectation that they would come into it still with a hangover from Sheffield United, I believe was their previous game where they lost 3-2.
Yeah,
But when you go with complacency into a game against ultimately a Premiership squad, okay, they got relegated with that squad, but even so, they're still far too good for this level. And they showed us how counter-attacking football should be played, and most importantly, they showed us how to play midfield football. When you pack the midfield with quality that they've got, then inevitably you're going to get the outcome that we received.
yeah. I mean, it was a bizarre one because for those first few minutes, Derby were kind of on the front foot, but as soon as that first goal went in, the floodgates really opened, as cliche as it is. I mean, what do you think that was down to? Do you think that's a mentality issue or just a bad day at the office?
I also think quality has to do with it, Jack, to be honest. If you look at the matchups, you look at like James, who plays that real, but it's a holding role, but it's almost like a hybrid role that he has. He pretty much has a free run in that middle zone of the pitch. And then you look at who else he had in the midfield and what we were putting against it. Let's be honest, Jack, were we ever going to really compete? Um, we've we've already been shown by the likes of Middlesbrough and Watford that if you don't match up like for like in the midfield zone, eventually it's going to come and bite you. The problem was with Saturday, it bit us in the eighth, 20th, and 32nd minute, if I remember. And other than them sort of releasing the gas as such, it could have been far more. And that's what was the concerning thing for me, that we look at three very good goals, but certainly preventable goals, which we'll go into, Jack. But I just thought there was just a tactical naivety about the whole game.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those where I mean, to be honest, once it was 2-0, you knew it was done, didn't you? Um, there's a real irony to the way it played out in a sense, with having that much possession, but it looking probably more like hoofball than we've maybe seen in a long time. I mean, just to kind of break down the goals, where do you think it went wrong?
Well, the first goal clearly was um, going gun ho and not realizing how quick the counter attack was going to come back. And let's be honest, it's a beautiful goal. It's a preventable goal because I think Clark loses the ball. No, Diaz. It's Diaz, isn't it, that loses the ball. Um, but it just shows you that if you're going to lose the ball in those kind of areas and you're playing with a wing back system and a very light midfield, you are going to get a counter attack like that, which will rip you apart. Unless they did their homework, they realised that they could punish Derby in those pockets of space behind the midfield and the back three, and boy, did they. Um, the other two, the second one is just really poor defending. Let's be honest, Jack, and you'll be able to break it down far better than me. And the third goal was just the ice on the cake, another good goal, but again, just tactical naivety.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that was the most blatant example uh, we've seen of that really this season. Maybe bar Oxford. It was interesting actually because post match, John Eustace had actually kind of called out a bit of a lack of leadership in his team, which is the first time we've heard that as well. So I do think it was quite stark, but really, yeah, that second goal, you know, James really takes his time over that corner. It comes out and somehow they just work it back and it drops for Oliver Skip. And I just, you know, he's in a great position at that point, but how it can get to him in the first place without a Derby man getting on it, there must be multiple defenders missing their jobs there, missing the markers. But yeah, and then obviously the third comes. Navadini pulls it back to Yannick Vestergaard. Bizarrely, he's the one crossing it rather than trying to get his head on it, the giant Dane. And yeah, again, it's another nice finish. And before that as well, if they hadn't had enough warning shots, there was Jordan Ayew as well heading at the back post from that free kick. And
Should have
Derby,
scored.
yeah, oh yeah, it just Derby just didn't seem to wake up. There were four by the kind of half hour mark. There'd been four opportunities where you thought, right, Derby really need to get their act together now, and try and mount some form of response, and it just wasn't there, was it? I mean, I I'm still slightly stunned by it, to be honest. But I mean, it's the quality of that Leicester side, right? In part.
It is, but Bristol City showed last night, didn't they, that you can get at Leicester. Sheffield United has shown it as well. Um, I just think what concerns me about Derby, and we'll come on to obviously the Millwall game. What concerns me about Derby is all of a sudden we've gone from a very strong back three or a back zone where we can rely on them certainly being tight and shipping in very little to now shipping in 3 goals against Leicester, 2 goals against Borough, 3 goals against Watford. And it just looks like the start of the season all over again. And I'm not sure, Jack, where this is all fallen apart, other than the fact they don't have strength in front of them. That's the only thing I can think of that, you know, and obviously the other issue was you're on about the long ball. When we played the long ball system with Carlton Morris up front, it stayed up top. But their expectation from the long ball is that Salverson, Ajimang, Diaz, etc., can do the same. And Carl Morris is head and shoulders above them when it comes to that kind of requirement of skill.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of really interesting trends as we, look at that game and then going into Millwall because you saw a change in the second half with Liam Thompson and Andy Vyman uh, coming on. But one of the key things there is that Salverson went off, didn't he? And Derby kind of lost that kind of traditional target man. So I mean, there was definitely a sense of trying to do a little bit of what Leicester had done and pack that midfield out a little bit more. But it did. They lost the focal point and almost gave up on that strategy a little bit. And of course, it's 3-0. The game is somewhat done, and they're just maybe trying things at that point. But credit has to go to Sunderland as well because it's another good goal from Joe Ward's ball. Interestingly, that was almost the exact same position that Ward delivered the ball from for Langas against Watford. So I do wonder if that's something that they've been working on. John Eustace last night singing the praises of Matt Gardner, set piece coach. But yeah, I think you're right. I think the loss of that focal point is huge. There is no one to kind of marshal that front line. It maybe just looks a little bit disjointed. Derby is still trying to figure out how best to reassemble that forward line without Carlton Morris.
Yeah, and Jack, it's not as if this has just happened overnight. You know, we knew about this in the 11th minute of the game he went off that we've got a problem and we need to look at this. And, you know, Salverson and fans have been screaming out for Salverson to have his chance. Well, what better opportunity? But again, it just proves that Salverson is not Carl Morris. although they may be similar in stature, physique, and height, their skill set is chalk and cheese. And it concerns me that Derby County, and I think this is where John Eustace in the past has also failed somewhat. He does have a plan A, and when the plan A works, it's very, very effective. But we, again, still don't have the plan B. Okay, we get a point against Millwall, which we'll come to, and Swansea. Although Swansea have now had that new manager bounce and they've just won two on the bounce. Um, I just worry that when it comes down to good tactical awareness and the ability to change formation, system, personnel, style, and implement it, we're just not doing it. Now, is this a John Eustace thing? Is this a lack of quality or depth in the squad, Jack?
Yeah, I mean that's the big question. I think that's something he's going to have to prove, isn't it? Really, with January on the horizon, it'll be interesting to see where where Derby reinforce. But the irony is, they spent what 6 million or so on a striker in Adjumang, who now is probably being seen as more of a kind of wide forward winger type player. You've got Salvesen there who should be chomping at the bit. And yeah, with Norris out, they don't have that player who can sort of just run the show up front. And I think it is. So it's the way that he was able to control key moments in games, even when Derby were having so little of the ball, right? That that element of control and that kind of assured presence that he gave you, not just going forward, but in the opposition, no, in your own box as well, heading the ball away, is something that Derby lack. Again, I think the leadership point it probably comes back to in part, but it got to a point there that last night we did see a change of shape and a sort of slightly bizarre front two with Brereton, Diaz, and Adjuvang as a kind of strike partnership, but both going quite wide at times. You had Andy Vyman deeper as a sort of 10. He was very much classed as a midfielder by John Eustace from the press conference conversation afterwards, alongside Bobby Clark and Liam Thompson. And in that moment again, you felt like, well, if he's dropping deep and they're going wide, who does that leave leading the line, right? And it felt like there was a lack of a focal point there. So certainly an interesting one. That Derby can have 11 players on the pitch and still feel a Carlton Morris shaped hole, not just in the kind of team and what he does, but simply in the positions he occupies. So I think that was quite noticeable to me last night.
Yeah, and as we move on to the Millwall game, and let's quickly leave the Leicester one behind because I don't want to reminisce on that really poor Saturday. I'm sure we went to a 4-4-2 last night. It felt like a more rigid setup because obviously Thompson isn't going to be able to give you what we need in a three or even a two in the middle. And I just felt that they asked Ward and Berrett and Diaz to sort of almost like become a rigid four. I just didn't think there was as much movement from from the midfield. I don't know what your thoughts were. And that Vyman and Ajimang were were not directly central either. It was almost that we had a gaping hole for Clark, who I thought Bobby Clark had his best game in a Derbyshire. I thought he was fantastic. He was almost becoming in some occasions a false nine. He was given that license to almost break up from the middle four and fill in that hole behind the two. And in some cases, it worked really, really well. And it did cause Millwall problems. But again, it just comes down to personnel. And I just thought we just did not have the personnel to be able to climatise to Millwall's physicality, to the 4-4-2. But I just didn't think we had enough creativity. We were relying very much on Clark. But if he's playing an advanced role in that system, then he also needs feed from behind him. And I just felt that it just showed for the first time, or certainly this week, of games, I'd probably say the last four games, to be fair, has shown the importance of the January window and how much do Derby need to invest in propping up the squad.
Yeah, I mean, I think just kind of looking at the game more widely, that point around Millwall and their physicality is intriguing because to me, that seems to be cancelled out somewhat with both teams because both teams are really strong in terms of threat from set pieces with those big aerial threats, that ability to kind of bully the opposition. And a lot of the spells in the game, good spells for either side, were prompted by some form of set play. A team would have a corner and they get a little bit of grip of the game for 3, 4 minutes. And I think really, it then just meant though that there was, with both sides cancelling each other out, there was very little quality left. I mean, again, if we talk of warning shots, then again, Derby, what more could they want than that kind of goalmouth scramble? Ivanovic taps in for a yard out after Sondre Langas is dispossessed.
Yeah.
At that point, surely you've got to be sharper. You've got to be waking up to that and going, right, okay, they're up for this. Femi Aziz, time after time after time, getting in down that right hand side. Now, Callum Elder was walking a tightrope ever since the third minute with that booking. That's not something that Millwall say they specifically targeted, by the way. That's just their strength. But the amount of times they got success with it looked as though they were. Because it was rinse and repeat with Aziz and Crammer. And Derby struggled to deal with it. At the same time, there were a couple of good chances for Derby. Even Callum Elder had that long range effort before Dion Sanderson's strike on the turn. And Patrick Adjumar with that diving header right at the end of the first half there was just a bit too much on it from Joe Ward, who had already had to fall off the line, had he not, by that point. So there was a lot going on, but very little at the same time. So it's so many kind of half chances, and it was just a game where Scrappy doesn't really do it justice.
No, and let's be honest, Ivanovic was so naive to be a yard offside. What worried me more that there was no Derby player within 10 yards of him. It was frightening how open he was in the 6 yard box. Um, Aziz, we were warned about by the preview show with Mickey from that Millwall podcast, where he said that this guy was on fire and he's getting better and better. And he said that they would target um, the wing backs with his pace. And lo and behold, they went for Elder really early. And that you like you said, Elder couldn't compete. Like, the press is saying that Langas played at right back and Ward in front of him at right mid. Now, I don't know if you agree with that or not. I know Langas has been covering Ward on many occasions in the three, but did it work last? I thought the second half was a lot better. I loved it when Brewster came on and him and Clark looked dangerous and they wanted to run at the players, and I like to see that bravery. Brewster looked like the player that we've been missing. Blackett Taylor on the ball, he wanted to drive. Clark, like I said, I thought was the shining light of the whole night, and he's getting better and better. And personally, he would be the first name I'd be going for to sign in January if the deal makes sense for everybody. But when you have to put Andreas Weimann up top, who's what, north side of 35, to play that role which he played, his legs aren't going to provide that kind of energy for 90 minutes. Ajimang, I thought, was complicated for Millwall, but I think eventually they worked him out. Stay tight on him. Don't let him turn with the ball. I just worry that we're becoming predictable, Jack, don't you think?
Yeah, and I think the fact that we can't really call things like shape is always a little bit alarming to me, just because it makes me wonder exactly what's going on. Because I would agree at times it did look more like before, but what John Eustace described to us post match was talking about his midfield three and his back five. So I think he was very much seeing it as a sort of 3-4-1-2-5-3-2 type shape, and the fact that it morphed. Um, into what did look like more of a 4-4-2, which to be fair, we have seen at times. There have been a couple of games where Brereton Diaz has practically been dropping into left back from that kind of inside left role. But but yeah, it just felt a little bit disjointed. And I mean, I will give some credit to Liam Thompson though, because that was his first league start since August. And do you know what? In the middle of the park with Bobby Clark, who, as you say, was creatively the shining light. He did most of what was asked of him. And I think, you know, for all the criticism Eva Adams has had over his distribution in particular, Liam Thompson out there was the most accurate passer of the ball. He kind of did his job and kept things ticking over. That became particularly important in the second half when Sanderson and Langas both decided to make overlapping runs at various points. So there's little bits in there that sort of work. I mean, again, Joe Ward, a few good crosses, but there's just not. It just didn't come together, did it? And I mean, it's remarkable to have two own goals. I mean, both are probably a little bit unlucky for the defenders. But yeah, I mean, you asked me last night when was the last time Derby had a draw with two own goals in it.
Yeah,
I mean, surprisingly, it took me about 2 minutes to find because back in April at Fratton Park, uh, Rob Atkinson scored two own goals for
he
Portsmouth.
did. Yes,
And he then scored at the other end as well, didn't he? So
yes.
that was the 2-2 draw. So yeah, no, it's another instance of multiple own goals for Derby County, and and yeah, no, I think it was for all we criticise, it was a good point. You'd have taken the point against third in the league, most likely. They're promotion chasers. They're doing well. And as I say, I do feel there was an element of them uh, of Millwall cancelling Derby out because in a lot of what Millwall have tried to do in recent weeks and some of their greatest strengths, some of their clearance numbers, and even the number of fouls that both sides make. They're the top two for fouls in the division, which I think really made the stop-start nature even worse in that scrappy affair. I wonder if Millwall are just a slightly better version in some aspects of what Derby are trying to do in terms of that organisation and in terms of long ball and using their height and physicality.
Yeah, it's a good point, Jack. What one thing I will say about Alex Neil is he's been around, a fair few years, and his teams have always been well organised. And I think their recruitment, listening and speaking to Mickey, going back to the previous show, their recruitment's been really interesting because they've gone high and wide, looking at lower divisions in various countries in Europe, Africa, Scandinavia, and they've pulled out some absolute gems. You look at Ballo and Kramer and Aziz, and you just think, you know, are we sort of are our expectations, including mine, a little bit too forward, and that this is probably the first year or the first window of three or four that we need before we can honestly say that we are able to adapt, compete, and change system against what's coming. I think Millwall have proven that they've been sort of pretty much stagnant over the last couple of years with those sort of top 10 finishes, but you had Rowett ball there for a couple of years. It was always that plan A, never a plan B. It was rigid, it was tight, it was strong, but ultimately a lot of teams would pick them off 1-0, 2-0. I think Millwall will surprise quite a few teams. I thought last night we all know we've got. I'm not one of these people, Jack, who looks at history. Oh, they're our bogey team. We've lost 9 out of 11. Blah blah. You can never, to me, you can never compare one football match from 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Some people love stats, some people love facts. I just like reality, and I just thought out the two teams, and Millwall had a fair few players out as well, but they just looked. They had the better depth to cope with it, and I just worry that with the games thick and fast in this period of time between now and January the 1st, I don't think it can come quick enough because looking at the bench and seeing three over, over 30-year-old centre halves on our bench, and then looking at two guys on there with a history of injury in Blackett Taylor and Brewster, you know straight away we need 4 or 5 to the door January if they can.
Yeah, it's where Derby are. It's a case of still building. I mean, it was a headline grabbing window in terms of having 13 signings, but as many went out the door, and you do feel that even that was the start of a long process. John Eustace keeps saying, doesn't he? He's here for 2 or 3 years. That's the vision, and I think that's why Derby at the moment are looking for signs of progress. Which, to be fair, 6 points better off than after this many games last year. That's pretty pretty decent sign of said progress. I think in terms of injuries, obviously every team is suffering a bit at this point in the season. Millwall, though, it's remarkable because Derby have got a few, Millwall have got a few more, including them being very concentrated. Alex Neil mentioned after the match, and I can't think of a time I've heard a number this high for a specific position. He mentioned 8 first team central midfielders being injured. You have multiple players who we normally play on the wing filling in the centre of the park. And I mean, that's the quality, isn't it? And the adaptability that you need at the top end of the championship that again Derby probably don't quite have yet. In fact, certainly don't have yet. Really. So yeah, I do wonder if it's a little bit of a look into the future, perhaps. But yeah, as I say, if you'd have offered a point before the game against third place, would I have taken it? Yeah. And now, do you know what? 2 games that should be winnable on paper with Sheffield Wednesday away and Portsmouth at home win those, and you sat at 1.5 points per game, which gets you 69 points over the course of a season. If we get anywhere near that sort of total, that would be a vast improvement on last season. So the flip side of that is, of course, how things change if those supposedly winnable games don't turn out to be wins. But do you know what? I think where Derby are right now, every team is having massive ups and downs in this league at the moment, bar Coventry. Look at Stoke, absolutely fallen off a cliff over the past few weeks. So, what, Derby, 5 points off the playoffs, and still 10 clear of relegation, roughly. I forget the exact number. Um, Again, that's actually, in the grand scheme, yeah, 10 clear of the drop, only 4 points off the playoffs, pardon
Yeah,
me.
four.
Um, that's a pretty healthy position to be in, really. So, it's it's about perspective, isn't it? But realistically, we do need to see a few more signs of life in the performances that we have over the last couple of games, don't we?
Yeah, but what I will say as well, Jack, is that the cream is starting to rise to the top now. The cream of the league has now got its act together, and they always inevitably have slow starts. But you look at the likes of Ipswich, Sheffield United, Southampton, Coventry. You know, they're now going to where they should be. And then you look at the surprises are now going back to where they should be. Charlton have lost 5 on the trot. Portsmouth have fallen apart. Like you said, Stoke are now starting to fall. You know, luckily for Derby, we can have a bad patch as we are now and still sit comfortably 10 points clear of relegation and not be playing well. Well, like you said, only 4 points off the promised land of the top 6. So, you know, it's all to play for. I always worry about going to Sheffield Wednesday, especially on a random Monday night. And, you know, the last time we went there, our backs were against the wall when, you know, we needed various things to go well for us to win. You know, I look at the where we came seventh and the beat us 1-0 and we knocked out the playoff. There's history between these two. And I just think that we're going there. Are we going there at the right time? I'm not sure. I just think Chef Wednesday are still playing for their lives at the moment. They still have that belief. I'd much rather play them in March, to be honest, than now, especially with the squad we've got. But going back to your points, I completely agree with you that Derby need to now look at the gaps. This is a perfect opportunity for John Eustace and Dave Clowes to sit down and reevaluate the squad and where we're at. The question is, Jack, like you said, 13 went out for 13 to come in. Does this mean we've got to ship 5 out for 5 to come in or 3 out to 3? You know, who do you see actually going out in January to allow these changes to happen?
Yeah, I mean that is the big question, and at the moment, it's quite hard to call. I mean, when you've got people like Corey Blackett Taylor who've been on the fringes, not really had that much of an opportunity. I could see that. I mean, obviously injuries do feed into this as well. There's suddenly a lot of talk about Emo Adams because surely he'll have ambitions to play every week, and that looks increasingly less likely at the moment. So there could be a lot of movement, uh, but equally, I think that will depend entirely on who Derby can get in. Maybe they've got an extra loan spot back now with Owen Beck having returned to Liverpool. How can they use that? But there will absolutely be things in the pipeline. I am sure. Um, so it'll be a really interesting January. What I'm intrigued by over the next week or so is again Derby looking for a response because it felt to an extent they got that last night in terms of mentality. There was a bit of a response from that Leicester game. They were certainly much more competitive, but Sheffield Wednesday is such a unique proposition because there's such a siege mentality. I mean, we know what it's like, right? It was the same at Pride Park, what, 4 years ago?
Yep.
I just wonder whether Derby going to Hillsborough in this scenario is a slightly different scenario again, because I think there's going to be, for all the kind of history between the two clubs, at its core, there's a kind of feeling of solidarity, I think, isn't there, whenever we go to a club in administration, in a bit of a financial pickle, a club on the brink. So I think the atmosphere will be really intriguing on Monday night. Of course, Sheffield Wednesday got nothing to lose. Derby have real expectation on them, which I don't think's happened that many times this season. So it's how they deal with that, and I think that will be an interesting proposition.
It will, and the Sheffield Wednesday crowd will be up for it, knowing it's Derby County. These two clubs have history. They're not particularly fond of each other. We can guarantee that Sheffield Wednesday are getting good loyalty from their fans at the moment, as Derby did through their trials and tribulations. I just hope that Brewster continues where he left off against Millwall because he looked really, really sharp. Clark looks on form. Um, to me, I think if Eustace is going to see where he's at come January, the likes of Blackett Taylor need to come in now. Let's not wrap him in cotton wool. Let's know for sure. Give him a start. Is he going to survive a turbulent, busy winter? The only way you're going to find out, Jack, is by playing him from the very beginning. Give Diaz a break. You know, can we just give it a little bit of mix? You see, I look at our bench. I look at Caden Jackson. Is it something like 50 games now with neither assist or a goal? I just don't see the relevance of keeping him. To be honest, I think he's one that could go. Um, I looked at the bench last night. Do we need Danny Bart anymore? Can we send him out on loan? Um, Fozzie, is he? He's not going to go anywhere. I just feel that Curtis Nelson. Are we going to keep him on the bench just to take the captaincy role when he's needed, or is it worth sending him out on loan and giving us a gap? There's lots of questions to ask. What worries me is we cannot go Sheffield Wednesday, Jack, showing our teeth. We can't go there and go, you may score three, we'll score five. We've proven that, haven't we? At the moment, we just haven't got that scoring capability or game management, and that's my only worry.
Yeah, 100%. I think Brewster coming in could be a really exciting addition, and I feel like with Brereton Diaz, it feels like he's in a little bit of a rut. So maybe giving him a game out, break that cycle, throw Brewster in there, that could certainly be interesting. Just one thing we haven't covered, Chris. Sondre Langas had the armband last night. Of course, what did that make him? Kind of fourth in line to the captaincy, perhaps, behind Travis, Adams, and Morris. Quicker than Mbappe, according to John Eustace. He gave us that great news line last night. But what are your thoughts on him having the armband?
Well, I predicted it on Radio Derby on Tuesday that I thought they'd go to Langas. Um, because if they see Langas as a long-term investment, it makes sense to make him at least assistant captain behind Morris when he's available. But that armband again has been passed from pillar to post this last two or three games. Like Nelson's had it, Langas has had it. Did Elder have it? I believe Elder had it for a while. And I just think that that doesn't help either when you've got a team who hasn't got an out and out leader. They've now found that in Langus, although they took him off last night as well. And look, if he's going to lead us in against Sheffield Wednesday, I'm all for it. I think he's quite capable of taking on that responsibility and keeping to the levels he's at. Um, I think that Clark, Sanderson, and Langus's form has dropped a little bit. And I think that's because of the amount of pressure they've been put under this last 2 or 3 games. And it's starting to show because it must take its toll. The amount of defending and almost going backwards on many occasions. Like there was one situation last night when Millwall on the counter attack, it was 5 against 3, if you remember, and it was an awful ball that fortunately stopped us from being ripped apart. But I just thought, how many times has that happened to us this last couple of games? And I think those three in particular are just hoping for a game where they can actually just do their jobs, which is just defend the air, defend the box, and just play out and let the midfield take some pressure. But I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Yeah, I think there's an underlying sense, isn't there, that we're just at a point where the game's coming thick and fast, the championship remains unpredictable, and maybe Derby just having to patch themselves up, keep maybe firefighting a little bit to just muddle through these next few games, and then maybe come January, uh, things might look a little bit different when they're kind of through this what 6 or 7 games in the next month. Final point, Chris, the last couple of minutes is FA Cup draw. Leeds at home. Thoughts on that?
Well, I had the pleasure of being speaking to Becky Measured on Radio Derby on Monday, and like I said, to me, it's a great draw. It's a guaranteed sellout. It's £500,000 in the pot, and we're going to need that for January. If we get beat by Leeds, but it brings in two quality loan signings from now to the end of the season, then it's a good tie. We could have got a banana skin away at a Div 1, Div 2 non-league club, and not A, earn no money, but B, go out on a whimper. So let's bring in Leeds. Let's take the money. Let's see if we can get a result. And if not, think of the positives. £500,000 in the bank. It might bring in those two signings we need.
100%. More on the FA Cup ties at the moment because Derby women have Sunderland of the WSL2. Tickets for that are free if you book in advance. I'll again more details on that in a moment as I give you an update on Derby County women. But for now, Chris, thanks very much for joining me tonight, mate.
Always a pleasure, Jack. Look forward to the next one.
Yes, and we will see you presumably post Sheffield Wednesday, where we will debrief all the action from Hillsborough and that FA Cup tie for Derby County women. So all that's left to say is up the Rams.